Evelyn Harper built her empire from nothing, a self-made millionaire by 30, untouchable, sharp, and alone by choice. But on a rain-slicked Portland evening, a barefoot child with haunted eyes steps into her path and delivers a chilling warning. You will die tomorrow. She laughs him off. The next day, her car is nearly crushed in a freak highway collision. By nightfall, her security team detects a credible threat against her life. Desperate and shaken, Evelyn begins a frantic search for the boy, a filthy, nameless street child who seems to know more about her fate than anyone should. When she finds him, he only says, "They're coming again." As Evelyn shelters the boy in her penthouse, she's forced to confront not only the terrifying danger that circles her, but the invisible trauma she's long buried, a past filled with grief, guilt, and a child she could never save. Who is this mysterious child? What secret connects their lives? And why does he seem to dream of tragedies before they unfold? In a race against time, Evelyn must unravel the truth behind a stranger's warning and face the darkest corners of her own soul before tomorrow becomes her last day. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below to let us know where you're watching this video. The rain had just begun to fall as Evelyn Harper stepped out of the grand ballroom, her heels clicking against the slick marble steps. The charity gala behind her buzzed with lingering warmth, laughter, clinking glasses, and soft jazz spilling into the cool night air. She pulled her tailored coat tighter around herself, more out of habit than necessity. She wasn't one to feel discomfort easily, not after decades of navigating boardrooms and backstabbing colleagues. "Miss Harper," called Marcus, her driver, from where he stood by the black town car. His voice carried a note of relief at seeing her emerge unscathed from another evening of forced smiles and insincere handshakes. Evelyn gave him a curt nod, already reaching for the door handle. But before she could step forward, something stopped her. A figure in the periphery of the streetlight's glow. A boy, no older than 10 or 11, stood barefoot on the wet pavement. His thin frame was draped in an oversized hoodie that hung off his shoulders like a shadow. His face was pale, almost translucent under the dim light, and his eyes, they were unsettlingly hollow, as though they'd seen too much of the world, or none of it at all. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might be lost, some runaway seeking shelter. Then he spoke. "You will die tomorrow." His voice was soft but steady, slicing through the hum of distant traffic and the patter of raindrops. It wasn't a plea or a cry for attention. It was a statement, delivered with eerie certainty. Evelyn froze mid-step, her polished exterior cracking just slightly. Her lips parted, though no words came out. For half a second, absurdity gave way to primal instinct. Fear coiled tightly in her chest before logic reasserted itself. This was ridiculous. A child playing games, nothing more. She laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound meant to mask the flutter of unease still lingering beneath her ribs. "Well, aren't you dramatic?" she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Run along now. You'll catch your death out here." But the boy didn't move. He simply stared at her, unmoving, unblinking. There was something unnerving about the way he held her gaze, as if he were peering past her carefully constructed facade and seeing something raw, something broken underneath. Behind her, Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am," he murmured, his voice low and strained. "Let's go. Please." Evelyn glanced over her shoulder, surprised by the urgency in his tone. Marcus had been her driver for years, stoic and unflappable. Yet now, his hands gripped the edge of the open car door like a lifeline, his knuckles white. She frowned, irritation flickering across her face. Was everyone losing their minds tonight? Turning back to the boy, she found nothing. Just empty space where he'd stood moments ago. No footsteps on the wet ground. No rustle of fabric disappearing into the darkness. He was gone, as if he'd never been there at all. A chill ran down her spine despite herself. Shaking her head, she slid into the back seat of the car, refusing to let her composure slip further. "Lock the doors," she instructed sharply, pulling out her phone to check email she didn't really need to read. Marcus obeyed without question, his movements brisk but deliberate. As the car pulled away from the curb, Evelyn caught sight of her reflection in the window. A woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed, commanding respect wherever she went. And yet, for the first time in years, she felt a crack in that armor. Something about the boy's words lingered, clinging to her thoughts like smoke. Tomorrow would come and go, just like any other day. Wouldn't it? The morning sun filtered weakly through the gray haze of Portland's overcast sky as Evelyn sat in the back seat of her car, scrolling absently through emails. Traffic was heavier than usual for this time of day, a sluggish river of brake lights and honking horns. She barely registered it. Mornings like these were part of routine, predictable and dull. "Marcus," she said sharply, glancing up from her phone, "take the bypass. This is ridiculous." Before Marcus could respond, the world seemed to tilt violently. A deafening screech of metal tore through the air. A semi-truck had jackknifed ahead of them, its trailer skidding sideways across all lanes. Cars swerved desperately, some colliding with each other in chaotic bursts of twisted steel and shattered glass. Time slowed to an agonizing crawl as Evelyn watched the massive truck barrel toward them, unstoppable, unyielding. Marcus wrenched the steering wheel hard, tires squealing against asphalt. The car fishtailed wildly before slamming into the guardrail. Evelyn's body lurched forward, her seatbelt biting into her chest as adrenaline surged through her veins. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind that follows chaos, heavy and oppressive. Then came the sound of crumpling metal behind them. The semi's trailer smashed into the concrete divider mere feet away, debris raining down like shrapnel. A traffic light, severed from its pole, swung precariously above them, its wires sparking faintly. It hung there like a noose, swaying gently in the wind. Evelyn stared at it, her breath shallow and uneven. Her hands trembled slightly on her lap, though she clenched them into fists almost immediately. "Marcus?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. He groaned softly, slumped over the wheel. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, staining his collar. Panic flared within her, but she pushed it down, focusing instead on assessing the situation. She reached out hesitantly, touching his shoulder. "Marcus!" "I'm fine," he muttered after a beat, straightening painfully. His face was pale, his jaw tight with pain. "Just give me a second." Relief washed over her briefly, but it was quickly replaced by something else. A strange, hollow sensation that made her laugh. The sound escaped her lips before she could stop it, low and brittle, echoing eerily in the confined space of the car. It wasn't joy or amusement. It was disbelief, tinged with hysteria. She pressed a hand to her mouth, silencing herself, but the echo lingered in her mind. They were alive, barely. But why did it feel like they shouldn't be? Later that afternoon, Evelyn sat in her office overlooking the city skyline, nursing a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Her usually immaculate desk was cluttered with reports and memos, none of which held her attention. Every so often, her gaze drifted to the window, where raindrops streaked the glass like tears. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Harrison Kane, her head of security, entered without waiting for permission. He was a tall man in his early 50s, broad-shouldered and perpetually serious, with close-cropped salt-and-pepper hair and eyes that missed nothing. Today, however, his expression was grimmer than usual. "You wanted an update," he began, closing the door behind him. His voice was calm but deliberate, the way one might speak when delivering bad news. "We've identified the cause of the accident. A blown tire on the truck. Nothing suspicious about that. However," he paused, pulling a tablet from his briefcase, "there's more." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, setting her teacup aside. "More?" Harrison nodded, tapping the screen to bring up a series of encrypted messages. "This came through last night, intercepted by our cybersecurity team. Someone sent an anonymous death threat targeting you." Her stomach dropped, though she kept her face impassive. "A threat? What exactly does it say?" "It's vague," Harrison admitted, handing her the tablet. "But clear enough. Tomorrow marks the end. That's it. No demands, no explanation." Evelyn scanned the message, her pulse quickening despite her best efforts to remain composed. Tomorrow. The word echoed in her mind, taunting her. Was it coincidence, or had someone known what would happen today? "Do we have any leads?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Not yet," Harrison replied. "The encryption is military grade. Whoever sent this knows what they're doing, but we're working on tracing the IP address." She handed the tablet back, leaning back in her chair. Her fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, betraying her agitation. "And the boy?" she asked, suddenly, surprising even herself. "From last night, did anyone see him?" Harrison frowned. "What boy?" "At the gala, outside, a child, barefoot, pale. He warned me." Her voice faltered slightly, and she cleared her throat. "About today." Harrison studied her carefully, his brow furrowing. "No one reported seeing a boy matching that description. Are you sure?" "I'm not imagining things," she snapped, cutting him off. Instantly she regretted the sharpness in her tone. Taking a deep breath, she softened her voice. "I'm just saying, it feels connected somehow." Harrison nodded slowly, though skepticism lingered in his eyes. "Understood. I'll look into it. In the meantime, we'll increase your security detail. No chances." As he left the room, Evelyn turned back to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the backdrop of the city. The boy's words haunted her now more than ever. "You will die tomorrow." Today had been close, too close. If Marcus hadn't reacted as quickly as he did, her thoughts trailed off, interrupted by the memory of her own laughter in the aftermath of the crash. It hadn't sounded like her, not really. It had sounded hollow, foreign, like someone else entirely. Was she losing her grip? Or was there something darker at play here, something she couldn't yet see? The city smelled different at night, damp concrete mingling with the faint tang of garbage and exhaust. Evelyn stood in the alley where she'd last seen the boy, her heels clicking softly against the uneven pavement. The space was narrower than she remembered, claustrophobic even, hemmed in by brick walls streaked with grime and graffiti. A single flickering street lamp cast long shadows that danced like specters. She shouldn't have been here. Not alone. Not after what had happened on the highway. But logic had little power over obsession, and Evelyn found herself returning to this place again and again, searching for answers that refused to reveal themselves. "Did you see him?" she asked the homeless man huddled under a tattered blanket near the dumpster. He looked up, startled, his eyes bloodshot and wary. "A boy? Pale skin, dark hair, barefoot, about 10 years old." The man shook his head slowly, clutching his blanket tighter around himself. "No kids out here, lady. You're wasting your time." Evelyn pressed a $50 bill into his hand anyway. ignoring the way he flinched at her touch. "If you do see him, call me." She handed him a business card, though she doubted he could read it, or cared enough to try. Still, it gave her something to do, some semblance of control in a situation spiraling rapidly out of her grasp. By day, Evelyn maintained her facade. The unshakable executive who ruled boardrooms with an iron will. By night, she became someone else entirely. A woman unraveling thread by thread, chasing ghosts no one else believed existed. She visited shelters scattered across Portland, bribing social workers with cash or promises of donations. Each denial chipped away at her resolve, yet somehow deepened her fixation. "He doesn't exist," one worker told her bluntly, exasperated by her persistence. "There's no record of any child matching that description. Maybe you imagined him." Imagined him. The thought gnawed at her, insidious and cruel. But how could she explain the clarity of his face, the weight of his words? She hadn't imagined the crash, the twisted metal, the dangling traffic light. And she certainly hadn't imagined Marcus bleeding beside her, his voice trembling as he assured her they were safe. Safe. Ha. The word felt hollow now, like everything else. Sleep eluded her. When exhaustion finally claimed her, it brought dreams so vivid they lingered long after waking. Always the same. A white door standing alone in an endless void, its surface smooth and pristine, untouched by age or wear. Behind it came the sound of crying. A child's voice, soft and broken, calling out for help. Evelyn would reach for the handle, her fingers brushing cold metal, but the door never opened. It remained stubbornly closed, taunting her with its secrets. One morning, she woke drenched in sweat, her heart pounding as if she'd run miles. The dream had changed slightly this time. As she reached for the handle, she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the door's surface. Her face was younger, softer, framed by hair longer than she'd worn it in decades. And behind her, just visible in the periphery, stood the boy from the alley. His hollow eyes stared back at her, accusing. Her hands trembled as she poured herself a cup of coffee, the liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. What was happening to her? Was it grief manifesting in strange ways? Guilt? Or was there truly something supernatural at play? That evening, Harrison cornered her in her office. His expression was grim, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "You're scaring people, Evelyn," he said without preamble. "This thing with the boy, it's not healthy." "It's real," she insisted, her voice sharper than she intended. "I know what I saw." "And I believe you saw something," he replied, holding up a hand to forestall her protest. "But maybe it's not what you think. Stress can play tricks on the mind. After the accident, the threat, it's understandable that you'd feel shaken. But obsessing over a phantom child isn't helping anyone, least of all you." Evelyn turned away, staring out the window at the city below. Lights twinkled like stars, distant and indifferent. For a moment, she considered telling him about the dreams, about the white door and the crying child. But the words caught in her throat, heavy and unwieldy. How could she explain something she didn't understand herself? Instead, she forced a brittle smile. "I'm fine, Harrison, really. Just tying up loose ends." He didn't look convinced, but he let it drop. As he left the room, Evelyn sank into her chair, rubbing her temples. The pressure behind her eyes throbbed relentlessly, a constant reminder of the sleep she wasn't getting. And then, as if summoned by her thoughts, her phone buzzed on the desk. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Her stomach clenched as she picked it up, hesitating only briefly before answering. "Miss Harper?" A voice whispered on the other end. Young, trembling, but unmistakably familiar. "You're running out of time." The line went dead before she could respond. Evelyn sat frozen, her breath shallow, her pulse racing. The boy's voice echoed in her ears, merging with the cries from her dreams, until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. She wasn't imagining this. She couldn't be. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Evelyn stepped into her penthouse lobby, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The concierge, a wiry man in his 60s named Carl, stood waiting for her, his face pale and drawn. "He's still here," Carl whispered urgently, nodding toward the far corner of the opulent space. "He won't talk to anyone but you." Evelyn's breath caught as she turned her gaze. There he was, the boy from the alley, huddled on one of the plush leather chairs that seemed to swallow him whole. His hoodie was smeared with dirt, his bare feet caked with grime. His skin looked even paler than before, almost translucent under the warm glow of the chandeliers. He shivered violently, though whether from cold or fever she couldn't tell. Her first instinct was to call security, to have him removed immediately. This was madness, letting a strange child into her home, especially now, when every nerve in her body screamed caution. But something about the way he sat there, so small and fragile, rooted her to the spot. She thought of the white door in her dreams, the crying voice behind it. And then she remembered his words. "You will die tomorrow." Against every rational impulse, she approached him. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. The boy lifted his head slowly, his hollow eyes locking onto hers. "They're coming again," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the faint hum of the air conditioning. "Who's coming?" Evelyn demanded, kneeling down to meet his gaze. Up close, she could see the feverish flush on his cheeks, the dark circles beneath his eyes. He looked like he hadn't eaten or slept in days. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out a trembling hand, grasping hers with surprising strength. His touch was icy, sending a jolt through her system. Then, just as suddenly, he let go and slumped back against the chair, his energy spent. Carl hovered nearby, wringing his hands. "Miss Harper, I can call the authorities." "No," she said sharply, cutting him off. Her mind raced, weighing the risks. Whoever, or whatever, this boy was, he clearly knew things he shouldn't. Things no child should know. If she sent him away now, she might never understand why he'd come to her in the first place. She straightened, her decision made. "I'll take care of him." The penthouse felt different with the boy inside, smaller, somehow, as if his presence had altered the very air. Evelyn led him to the guest bedroom, guiding him gently by the elbow. He moved like a shadow, silent and unsteady, leaning heavily on her for support. She helped him into bed, pulling the covers up around his thin frame. His shaking subsided slightly, though his breathing remained shallow and labored. In the kitchen, Evelyn stared at the stove, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. Soup. Why had she thought of soup? It was absurd, a relic of another life, one she'd left behind decades ago. Cooking wasn't part of her world anymore. Meals were ordered in, plated elegantly by someone else's hands. Yet, here she was, rummaging through cabinets for a can of chicken broth, chopping vegetables with clumsy precision. The act unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Each slice of the knife felt foreign, each stir of the pot stirring memories she'd long buried. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her mind, murmuring recipes and advice. "A good meal fixes everything," she used to say, but nothing about this situation felt fixable. When the soup was ready, Evelyn carried it into the guest room on a tray. The boy was awake, watching her with those unnerving eyes. She set the tray down on the nightstand and handed him the bowl, along with the spoon. He hesitated, staring at the steaming liquid as if unsure what to do with it. "It's safe," she said softly, though she wasn't sure why she felt the need to reassure him. "Eat." He obeyed, lifting the spoon to his lips with shaky hands. As he ate, Evelyn perched on the edge of the bed, studying him. "What's your name?" she asked finally. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice so soft she almost missed it, he said, "Liam." "Liam," she repeated, testing the name. It fit him, somehow, grounding him in reality. "How did you find me?" His spoon paused mid-air. "I didn't find you," he said simply. "You found me." The statement sent a chill down her spine. Before she could press further, he pushed the half-empty bowl aside and lay back against the pillows, exhaustion overtaking him once more. Within moments, his breathing grew slow and steady, signaling sleep. Evelyn sat there for a while longer, watching him. For the first time in years, she felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Not fear, not anger, but something softer, something maternal. It startled her, this sudden swell of protectiveness for a child who had appeared out of nowhere, warning her of dangers she didn't yet understand. As she rose to leave the room, she glanced back at him one last time. In sleep, his face lost some of its haunting intensity, revealing the innocence of a boy far too young to carry such burdens. But innocence or not, Evelyn knew one thing for certain. Liam had brought trouble with him. And trouble, she suspected, had only just begun. Evelyn sat at her dining table, the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse. Spread before her were Liam's drawings, crude but haunting sketches that seemed to leap off the page with an eerie intensity. She had found them scattered across the guest room after he'd fallen asleep again, tucked under his pillow like secrets too dangerous to share. Each image was more unsettling than the last. In one, a shadowy figure stood over Evelyn's bed while she lay motionless, her face obscured by sleep. The intruder wore a grotesque mask, its features exaggerated into something monstrous. Another depicted a bridge collapsing into a river below, cars tumbling end over end in chaotic freefall. And then there was the fire, a house engulfed in flames, a woman silhouetted in a window, her mouth open in a silent scream. At first glance, they could have been the feverish imaginings of a traumatized child. But as Evelyn studied them, her unease deepened. There was something deliberate about the details. The way the flames licked upward in jagged streaks, the precise curve of the bridge's railing as it buckled. These weren't random doodles. They were records, almost journalistic in their accuracy. She pulled out her laptop and began searching for news articles, starting with the most recent dates. The bridge collapse matched nothing current, though it bore an uncanny resemblance to an incident from 5 years ago in Seattle. The masked figures entering her home might have been symbolic, or perhaps predictive, given the anonymous death threats still lingering in the back of her mind. But the fire... Her fingers froze on the keyboard as the search results loaded. A headline caught her eye. Fatal house fire claims life of local artist in Eugene. The article was dated 2 days ago. According to the report, a woman named Clara Bennett had perished in the blaze, which authorities believed to be accidental due to faulty wiring. Accompanying the story was a photo of the charred remains of the house, and in the background, barely visible through the smoke, was a figure framed in a second-story window. Evelyn's breath hitched. It was unmistakable. The posture, the angle, it was exactly as Liam had drawn it, down to the tilt of the woman's head as she screamed. Her hands trembled as she closed the laptop, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her chest. How could this boy know? He couldn't have seen the fire himself, not unless he'd been in Eugene days ago, which was impossible. Unless he wasn't just a boy. That evening, Evelyn returned to the guest room, where Liam sat cross-legged on the bed, staring out the window at the city lights. He didn't turn when she entered, though she knew he was aware of her presence. She held up one of the drawings, the fire, and asked quietly, "How did you know?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, almost mechanical. "I see things," he said simply. "Things that haven't happened yet. Or things that already have." "Are they warnings?" she pressed, sitting beside him. "Is that why you came to me?" Liam shook his head, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the horizon. "Not warnings. Memories." The word sent a shiver down her spine. Memories? Whose memories? His silence stretched long enough that she thought he might not respond. Then, softly, he said, "Yours." Evelyn blinked, certain she'd misheard him. "Mine? That's impossible. I've never seen any of these things." "You don't remember," Liam replied, turning to look at her for the first time. His eyes were impossibly old, as if they carried centuries of sorrow within them. "But you will." Before she could ask what he meant, he reached out and touched her hand. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a jolt through her system, like static electricity amplified tenfold. Images flooded her mind, fragmented, disjointed flashes of fire and water, screaming voices and crumbling structures. She gasped, pulling her hand away, her heart pounding wildly. "What was that?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "What did you do to me?" "I showed you," Liam said, his tone matter of fact. "Just a little. Enough so you'll understand." "Understand what?" she snapped, frustration overriding her fear. "You're talking in riddles, Liam. If you know something, tell me." For the first time since meeting him, Liam smiled. A sad, knowing smile that made her stomach twist. "It's not my story to tell," he said. "It's yours." And with that, he turned back to the window, effectively dismissing her. Evelyn stared at him, her mind racing. Whatever this boy was, whatever connection existed between them, it was far beyond anything she'd anticipated. And as much as she wanted to deny it, to chalk it all up to coincidence or delusion, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. This was her story, and she was only beginning to uncover its truth. Evelyn sat alone in her study, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. The envelope was brittle with age, its edges frayed from years of being folded and refolded. She hadn't opened it when it arrived 12 years ago. Hadn't even read the return address before locking it away in her safe. Now, as she stared at the familiar handwriting scrawled across the front, guilt coiled tightly around her chest. She had always prided herself on control, the ability to compartmentalize, to leave the past where it belonged. But Liam had cracked something inside her, a fissure that widened with each passing day. His presence stirred memories she'd buried so deeply she'd convinced herself they no longer existed. Yet here they were, surfacing unbidden, like ghosts clawing their way out of the dark. The first flashback came while she was making tea in the kitchen. One moment, she was reaching for a mug. The next, she was standing in a sterile hospital corridor, the air thick with antiseptic. A young girl in a pink coat ran past her, giggling, a sound both joyful and heartbreaking. Evelyn reached out instinctively, but her hand passed through nothingness. The scene dissolved before she could grasp it, leaving her breathless and disoriented. It happened again, later that night, this time more vividly. She saw herself younger, sitting beside a hospital bed. Her sister, Claire, lay pale and fragile beneath the thin blanket, her once vibrant eyes dulled by illness. Between them sat a small boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit. He looked up at Evelyn with wide, trusting eyes, his voice soft but insistent. "Aunt Evie, will you stay?" She remembered what she'd said, or rather, what she hadn't said. How she'd stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked away without answering. Back in the present, Evelyn exhaled shakily and broke the seal on the letter. The paper inside was worn but intact, the ink faded but legible. Claire's words leapt off the page, raw and pleading. "Evie, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe you've already decided I'm not worth your time, but I need you now. More than I've ever needed anyone. He needs you too, the boy. His name is Liam. You remember him, don't you? That's why you left, isn't it? Because you couldn't face him after everything. Please come back. For me. For him. For all he has left. Love, Claire." Evelyn's vision blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She clutched the letter tightly, her knuckles white. Liam. Of course it was him. The hollow-eyed boy who haunted her dreams, who drew scenes of tragedy as though reliving them. He wasn't just some random child sent to warn her. He was family. Her nephew. Her responsibility. She thought of the death certificate she'd tucked into the same safe years ago, folded until the creases nearly tore the paper. Claire Harper, deceased, cause of cancer. Date, 10 months after the letter was written. Evelyn hadn't attended the funeral, hadn't called, hadn't done anything except bury the pain under layers of work and ambition, pretending it didn't exist. And now Liam was here, carrying pieces of a past she'd tried so desperately to forget, pieces she hadn't realized she needed until now. Later that evening, Evelyn returned to the guest room. Liam was asleep, curled into himself like a wounded animal. She knelt beside the bed, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. His skin was warm, not with fever this time, but with the quiet vitality of life. For the first time, she allowed herself to really look at him, to see the echoes of Claire in his delicate features, the remnants of innocence he still clung to despite everything. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I should have been there. For both of you." Liam stirred faintly, his eyelids fluttering open. He gazed up at her, his expression unreadable. Then, softly, he murmured, "You came back." Evelyn froze, her heart pounding. "What did you say?" He blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "Nothing," he mumbled, turning over and drifting back to sleep. But Evelyn remained frozen, her mind racing. Those words, they weren't his. They were hers. Or rather, they were someone else's, spoken long ago in a memory she couldn't quite grasp. As she stood and turned off the light, one thought lingered in the darkness. If Liam carried her memories, whose memories was she carrying? Evelyn sat in her dimly lit study. The grainy black-and-white footage paused on her laptop screen. The figure was unmistakable. A man, clad in a dark hoodie and gloves, moving with deliberate precision down the hallway of her penthouse floor. The timestamp at the bottom of the frame confirmed it. 2:47 a.m., just hours earlier. Her security system had been breached, not by brute force, but by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Harrison stood beside her, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His usual stoic demeanor was fractured, replaced by an unease that mirrored her own. "Whoever this is," he said, pointing to the screen, "they didn't take anything. No valuables disturbed, no files accessed. They came for something else." "For me," Evelyn murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples as the weight of the situation settled heavily on her shoulders. First the death threat, then the near miss on the highway, now this. Someone was playing a game, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Liam was at the center of it all. Or for him, Harrison countered, nodding toward the guest room where Liam slept, or rather, where he should have been sleeping. Evelyn's stomach tightened. When she entered the room, she found the bed empty. Panic surged through her, sharp and immediate, until she spotted Liam standing by the window, staring out at the city lights. His bare feet pressed against the cold hardwood floor, and his hands hung limply at his sides. He swayed slightly, his eyes half closed, though he didn't seem fully awake. "Liam," she called softly, approaching him cautiously. He didn't respond. Instead, he began to mutter under his breath, his voice low and rhythmic, like a chant. The words were foreign, guttural syllables strung together in patterns she couldn't decipher. It wasn't Spanish or French, nothing recognizable from any language she'd ever encountered. Evelyn froze, her pulse quickening. "Liam, can you hear me?" He turned slowly, his gaze distant, unfocused. When he spoke again, his tone shifted, becoming clearer, almost conversational, but still in that strange tongue. Then, abruptly, he switched to English, his voice hollow and mechanical. "A place with no sky," he whispered, "no stars, just walls, endless walls." "What are you talking about?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. She reached out to touch his shoulder, but he flinched away, recoiling as if burned. "They're waiting," he continued, oblivious to her presence. "They've always been waiting." "For who?" she demanded, gripping his arm firmly. "Liam, wake up!" His eyes snapped open wide, startled, and he blinked rapidly, confusion washing over his features. "Evie?" he asked groggily, using the nickname Claire had once called her. "What? Where am I?" Her grip loosened, relief flooding through her. "You're safe," she assured him, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "You were sleepwalking." "I don't remember," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "I don't." "It's okay," she said, guiding him back to the bed. But as she tucked the blankets around him, her mind raced. What had he meant by a place with no sky? And why did those words send a chill down her spine, as though they resonated with some buried truth? The next morning, Evelyn handed a sealed envelope containing a strand of Liam's hair to one of her most trusted contacts, a private investigator with access to discreet DNA testing services. "I need answers," she told him firmly, "as soon as possible." The man nodded, tucking the envelope into his coat pocket. "Results will take a few days. I'll prioritize it." As he left, Evelyn returned to the living room, where Harrison waited with updates on the CCTV footage. "We traced the route the intruder took," he explained, pulling up a map of the building on his tablet. "He entered through the service elevator, bypassed 2 layers of security, and exited the same way. No alarms triggered. Whoever this is, they're good." "Too good," Evelyn muttered, pacing the length of the room. Her thoughts kept returning to Liam's cryptic mutterings, the masked man on the tape, the drawings that seemed to predict tragedies. Everything pointed to something larger than she could comprehend, something tied not only to her past, but perhaps to Liam's very existence. "Do you think he's in danger?" Harrison asked, breaking through her reverie. She stopped mid-step, turning to face him. "Yes," she admitted. "But I also think we both are." That night, Evelyn lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded her, chased away by fragmented memories and unanswered questions. She thought of the fire in Eugene, the bridge collapse, the woman screaming in the flames. Each image felt like a piece of a puzzle she couldn't quite assemble. And then there was Liam, the boy who drew disasters before they happened, who spoke in languages she didn't understand, who claimed her memories as his own. Who was he? Was he truly her nephew, as Claire's letter suggested? Or was he something else entirely? As exhaustion finally dragged her into a restless slumber, the dream returned. The white door, the crying child behind it. This time, however, when she reached for the handle, it opened. Beyond it lay not a room, but a vast expanse of darkness. Walls stretched infinitely in every direction, smooth and unbroken, devoid of windows or exits. Above her, no sky. Below her, no ground. Only emptiness. And then she heard it, a voice, soft and familiar, calling her name. Evie. She spun around, searching for the source, but saw only shadows. The voice came again, closer this time, urgent. Evie, you have to stop them. Stop who? She cried, her voice echoing into the void. But the shadows swallowed her question, and she woke with a start, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding wildly. In the silence of her bedroom, one thing became clear. The answers weren't coming fast enough, and whoever, or whatever, was hunting them wouldn't wait. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she stood in the doorway of her bedroom, watching Liam crouch by the open closet. His small hands moved methodically through the contents, scarves, boxes, a forgotten hat, but paused when they reached the locked drawer at the bottom. It was a relic from another life, untouched for decades, its brass handle tarnished with age. "What are you doing?" she demanded sharply, startling him. Liam turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "Something told me to look here." Her heart raced as she crossed the room and knelt beside him. The drawer had always been an enigma, even to herself. A part of her past she'd sealed away without ever fully understanding why. She hadn't thought about it in years, yet, now, staring at the stubborn lock, it felt like the key to everything. "Move," she said brusquely, shooing him aside. From the top shelf of the closet, she retrieved a small tin box containing spare keys and other odds and ends. After several tense moments of trial and error, one of the keys clicked into place. The drawer slid open with a reluctant groan. Inside lay a single item. A faded photograph, its edges worn and slightly curled. Evelyn picked it up with trembling fingers, her pulse quickening as she took in the image. A younger version of herself smiled stiffly at the camera, her arm wrapped protectively around a toddler with wide, curious eyes. Beside them stood a weary-looking woman with soft features and tired eyes, her sister Grace. Grace, not Claire. The realization hit Evelyn like a punch to the gut. For years, she'd believed Claire was her only sibling, the one who died too young, leaving behind the boy now sitting before her. But this changed everything. "Who is that?" Liam asked, peering over her shoulder. "My sister," Evelyn replied hoarsely. "Grace. I haven't thought about her in, God, I don't even know how long." But the toddler, could it be? Could that child be him? The resemblance was undeniable. The same hollow gaze, the same fragile frame. If this was indeed Liam, then he wasn't just her nephew. He was also tied to Grace, whose existence Evelyn had all but erased from her memory. The next morning, Evelyn found herself standing outside her childhood home, a sprawling Victorian house nestled on the outskirts of Portland. Time had not been kind to it. The once vibrant paint had faded to a dull gray, and ivy crept unchecked along its walls. A sign out front declared it a hospice care center now, a place where lives ended rather than began. She hesitated at the entrance, clutching the photograph tightly in her hand. Memories stirred uneasily within her, fragments of laughter and arguments, of doors slammed shut and words left unsaid. This house had been both sanctuary and prison, a labyrinth of love and loss she'd vowed never to revisit. Yet here she was, drawn back by forces she couldn't yet comprehend. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. A strange juxtaposition meant to soothe, but instead making her skin crawl. An elderly receptionist greeted her warmly, though her smile faltered when Evelyn explained her purpose. "I'm looking for information about someone who lived here many years ago," Evelyn said, holding up the photograph. "My sister, Grace Harper." Recognition flickered across the woman's face, though it was tinged with sadness. "Ah, yes," she murmured. "Grace, such a sweet soul. We don't have records going back that far, but there's a volunteer who's been with us for decades. Mrs. Whitaker, she might remember something." Mrs. Whitaker turned out to be a frail woman in her late 80s, her silver hair pinned neatly atop her head. When shown the photograph, her eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh, yes," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of countless stories. "That's Grace. And little Liam. Poor things." Evelyn's stomach churned. "Little Liam?" Mrs. Whitaker nodded, her gaze distant. "He came here after what happened. Grace tried so hard to keep him safe, bless her heart. But she was sick, you see, too sick to fight any more." "What happened?" Evelyn pressed, her voice barely above a whisper. The older woman sighed heavily, leaning back in her chair. "It was a fire. Terrible thing. Grace managed to get Liam out, but she didn't make it. He hasn't been the same since. Keeps talking about a place with no sky. Doctors say it's trauma, but..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Sometimes I wonder if it's something more." Evelyn felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Fire. Again. Just like the one in Eugene, the one Liam had drawn before it happened. And the phrase. He'd said those exact words in his sleep. "Do you know where Liam went after Grace passed?" Evelyn asked, though she feared the answer. Mrs. Whitaker frowned. "Social services took him, I think. There was some trouble placing him. He kept running away. Last I heard, he was sent to live with relatives in Seattle." Her gaze sharpened suddenly, pinning Evelyn with an intensity that startled her. "You're family, aren't you? You must be Evie. Grace used to talk about you. Said you'd come back someday." The accusation stung, sharp and unrelenting. Evelyn looked down at the photograph, guilt twisting like a knife in her chest. She hadn't come back, not for Grace, not for Liam. Not until now. As she thanked Mrs. Whitaker and stepped back into the cool autumn air, one thought consumed her. If Liam had survived the fire, then who, or what, was the boy in her penthouse? The nurse's words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding, as Evelyn stood frozen in the dimly lit hallway of the hospice center. The woman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, had approached her almost cautiously, as if sensing the storm brewing beneath Evelyn's composed exterior. "Grace always said you'd come back when it mattered," the nurse repeated softly, her gaze unwavering. "She held on to that hope until the very end." Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat tight. She hadn't expected this. Not here, not now. Grace had been dead for 2 years, yet Evelyn felt the weight of her absence like a fresh wound. How could she have let so much time pass without even knowing? "What happened to him?" Evelyn asked finally. her voice trembling despite her best efforts to steady it. To Liam, Daniel, whatever his name was. The nurse hesitated, glancing around as though ensuring they were alone before continuing. His name was Daniel Harper, a miracle child, they called him. Born premature, barely clinging to life, but he survived against all odds. Grace adored him, fought tooth and nail to keep him safe after... She trailed off, shaking her head slightly. After everything fell apart. Evelyn's mind raced. Everything. The fire, the loss, the fragments of memories clawing at the edges of her consciousness. It wasn't just Grace who had suffered. It was Daniel, too. And somehow, inexplicably, he had found his way to her. He didn't speak much, the nurse continued, her tone laced with both sadness and wonder. But when he did, it was always about tomorrow. He'd wake up screaming, shouting things no child should ever know, dates, places, names. It was like he could see tragedies before they happened. She paused, lowering her voice further. Grace believed it was a curse. She used to sit by his bedside for hours, whispering prayers, begging God to take it away from him. A curse? The word sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. Was that what Liam, or Daniel, was carrying? A burden too heavy for any child to bear? What happened after Grace passed? Evelyn pressed, her grip tightening on the photograph still clutched in her hand. The nurse sighed deeply, her expression somber. Social services took him, tried to place him with foster families, but he kept running away. Said he needed to find you. After a while, they stopped trying. No one knows where he ended up. No record of adoption, no follow-up. He just vanished. Vanished, just like the boy in the alley, appearing out of thin air with warnings of death and disaster. Evelyn's thoughts spiraled, connecting dots she hadn't realized were there. If Daniel had disappeared years ago, then who, or what, was the boy sleeping in her guest room now? Did anyone else try to help him? Evelyn asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Anyone who might still be looking for him? The nurse shook her head slowly. There was a caseworker, a man named Mr. Caldwell. He was particularly invested in Daniel's case. Kept saying the boy deserved better. But after Grace died, he seemed to give up too. Moved away, I think. Haven't heard from him since. Evelyn nodded absently, her mind already racing ahead. Caldwell, another thread to pull, another piece of the puzzle to chase. But first, she needed answers closer to home. That evening, Evelyn returned to her penthouse, her steps heavy with exhaustion and dread. Liam sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by sheets of paper covered in his unsettling drawings. He looked up as she entered, his hollow eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "Where were you?" he asked quietly, his voice devoid of accusation but laced with something else. Longing, perhaps, or fear. "I went back," she admitted, sitting across from him. "To the house. To Grace." Liam's expression shifted subtly, though whether in recognition or confusion, she couldn't tell. "Grace?" he murmured, testing the name. "She smells like lavender." Evelyn froze, her breath catching. Lavender. That was exactly how Grace had smelled, the same scent that lingered faintly in the hospice center. How could Liam possibly know that? "You remember her?" Evelyn asked, leaning forward slightly. He shook his head, his gaze distant. "Not really, just pieces. Like dreams that aren't mine. Pieces. Fragments of memories that weren't his own, but hers. Or Grace's, or someone else's entirely." Evelyn stared at him, the truth beginning to crystallize in her mind. "You're not just Daniel, are you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're carrying something, someone, inside you." Liam tilted his head, studying her with those unnervingly old eyes. For a moment he didn't respond. Then, softly, he said, "I'm everyone who didn't make it. Everyone who tried to warn you." The room seemed to shrink around them, the walls closing in as Evelyn processed his words. Warnings, visions, a curse. All of it pointed to one horrifying possibility. Whatever force had claimed Grace and nearly claimed Daniel had found its way into him, and now, through him, it had come for her. As she reached out to touch his hand, seeking some semblance of connection, a single thought echoed in her mind. If Daniel carried the weight of the past, then what would happen when the future finally caught up? The penthouse was silent, save for the soft hum of the city outside. A distant murmur that did little to drown out the storm raging within Evelyn. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as they clutched the photograph of Grace and Daniel. The memory had surfaced unbidden, sharp and unrelenting, slicing through decades of carefully constructed denial. It was a phone call she'd ignored, a decision she justified then but couldn't escape now. Grace's voice, strained and desperate, echoed in her mind. "Evie, please. It's Daniel. He's burning up, and they won't listen to me at the hospital. I need you here." Evelyn had been in a boardroom, surrounded by men who hung on her every word, their eyes gleaming with greed and ambition. A billion-dollar deal teetered on the edge of collapse, and she'd convinced herself it was too important to walk away from. Too critical. "I'll call back tomorrow," she'd told herself, silencing the guilt with practiced ease. Tomorrow will be soon enough. But tomorrow had come, and Grace was gone, consumed by flames, leaving behind only ashes and a child who screamed about things he shouldn't know. And Evelyn. Evelyn hadn't even attended the funeral. Her breath hitched, tears spilling down her cheeks as the weight of her choices crashed over her like a tidal wave. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to block out the image of Grace's face, so tired, so hopeful, clinging to the belief that her sister would come through when it mattered most. And she hadn't. A soft sound drew her attention, pulling her out of the suffocating grip of memory. Liam stood in the doorway, his small frame framed by the dim light from the hallway. His hollow gaze bore into her, unreadable yet piercing, as if he could see straight through her defenses to the raw truth beneath. "You left her," he said quietly, his voice devoid of accusation but heavy with sorrow. "You didn't answer." Evelyn's chest tightened, shame choking her words before they could form. She wanted to deny it, to explain, to justify, but what excuse could possibly suffice? Instead, she nodded, her tears flowing freely now. "I know," she whispered hoarsely. "I should have been there, for both of you." Liam stepped closer, his bare feet silent against the carpet. He stopped just short of her, tilting his head as though studying a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Then, in a voice so soft it barely registered, he added, "I remember your voice." The words hit her like a sledgehammer, shattering whatever fragile composure she'd managed to hold on to. Her voice. How could he remember something she hadn't even given him? She hadn't spoken to Grace that night, hadn't comforted her or promised to help. All she'd done was ignore the call, silence the ringtone, and focus on the deal that suddenly felt meaningless. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I never—" "You were there," Liam interrupted, his tone matter-of-fact. "Not with words, but with silence. Silence can be louder than anything else." Evelyn stared at him, her heart pounding wildly. Was this another fragment of someone else's memory, another echo of a life she'd failed to protect? Or was it something deeper, a manifestation of the guilt she carried, given form in the boy before her? "I'm sorry," she choked out, reaching for him instinctively. Her hand hovered in the air between them, unsure if she had the right to touch him, to offer comfort when she'd already taken so much away. Liam didn't pull back. Instead, he placed his own hand over hers, his touch cool and steady despite the feverish tremor still lingering in his body. "You came back," he murmured. "That's what matters now." His forgiveness, if that's what it was, only deepened her anguish. How could he absolve her when she couldn't absolve herself? How could he trust her when she'd already betrayed him, long before he'd even known her name? As they sat together in the dimly lit room, Evelyn realized the truth. The boy wasn't just carrying memories of those who hadn't survived. He was also carrying her failures, the lives she hadn't saved, the people she'd abandoned. And somehow, impossibly, he was asking her to make it right. But how could she fix something that had been broken for so long? The answer lay somewhere in the tangled threads of the past, and in the warnings still waiting to unfold. The envelope arrived in the late afternoon, slipped discreetly under her penthouse door by the private investigator she'd hired. Evelyn picked it up with trembling hands, her pulse quickening as she tore it open. The results were brief, clinical, and devastating. Daniel Harper, confirmed relation, nephew. But beneath the sterile language lay a revelation that turned her blood to ice. According to official records, Daniel had been declared legally dead 7 years ago. A death certificate filed away, buried under layers of bureaucracy and indifference. Yet, here he was, alive, though barely, sitting in her guest room, drawing scenes of tragedies yet to unfold. Evelyn sank into her chair, the paper fluttering from her fingers onto the desk. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments of information like shards of broken glass. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase him, to make him disappear. But who and why? Her phone buzzed sharply, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was Harrison. "We found something," he said without preamble. His voice was tense, urgent. "About those treatment centers you asked me to look into." Evelyn's breath caught. She'd tasked Harrison with digging into the shadowy network of facilities rumored to house problem children. Kids society deemed too difficult, too broken, to fit neatly into foster care or adoption systems. Kids like Daniel. "What did you find?" she asked, gripping the edge of the desk. "One name keeps coming up," Harrison replied. "Victor Langston. Ring any bells?" It did. Evelyn's stomach churned as the memory surfaced. A man she'd faced across a courtroom years ago. Langston, a wealthy investor whose shady dealings she'd exposed during a high-profile case. She'd dismantled his empire piece by piece, leaving him financially ruined and publicly humiliated. At the time, she'd felt no remorse. Justice had been served. But now, "Langston's back," Harrison continued, "operating under the radar through shell companies and offshore accounts. He's tied to several residential treatment centers, places where kids go in but rarely come out. Allegations of abuse, neglect, even disappearances. Nothing sticks because the funding comes from powerful people who want plausible deniability." Evelyn's mind flashed to Daniel's drawings. The fire, the bridge collapse, the woman screaming behind barred windows. Had these places been his prison? Were they still holding others captive? "There's more," Harrison added grimly. One facility outside Eugene closed down 5 years ago after a fire destroyed the building. 12 children were listed as missing, presumed dead. Only one body was recovered. Daniel. She didn't need to ask which child had survived. The boy in her home carried scars far deeper than burns or bruises. Scars etched into his very soul by whatever horrors he'd endured within those walls. That evening, Evelyn confronted Liam, not with questions this time, but with answers. Sitting beside him on the living room floor, she laid out the documents and photographs Harrison had compiled. The boy studied them silently, his expression unreadable. "This is where you came from," she said gently, pointing to an image of the burned-out husk of a building labeled Sunrise Haven Residential Treatment Center. "Do you remember?" Liam nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "They called it helping, but it wasn't help. It was breaking." Evelyn's chest tightened, anger simmering beneath her grief. "Who did this to you? Was it Langston?" He shook his head. "Not just him. Others too. Men in suits, women with clipboards. They wore masks sometimes so we couldn't see their faces. They told us we were sick, that we needed fixing, that our visions made us dangerous. Visions." The word sent a chill down her spine. Whatever curse Grace had believed Daniel carried, it hadn't been unique to him. Other children had shared it, shared the burden of seeing what shouldn't be seen. And the others? She pressed, dreading the answer. What happened to them? "They didn't make it," Liam whispered, clutching his knees to his chest. "Some tried to run like me. Most stayed too long. I don't know how I got out. One day, I woke up in the woods, alone." Evelyn reached for him, pulling him close despite his initial resistance. He tensed at first, then relaxed slightly, allowing himself to lean against her. For the first time since he'd appeared in her life, he seemed less like a harbinger of doom, and more like what he truly was, a frightened child carrying unimaginable pain. As she held him, Evelyn vowed silently that Langston, and whoever else was involved, would pay for what they'd done. Not just to Daniel, but to all the children they'd stolen, silenced, erased. But vengeance wouldn't bring back the lost, wouldn't undo the damage already done. And as Liam murmured faintly in his sleep later that night, words in languages she didn't understand, cries of warning she couldn't decipher, Evelyn realized the truth. The past wasn't finished with her yet. Nor was tomorrow. The press conference was a blur of flashing cameras and shouted questions, but Evelyn stood resolute at the podium, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. The documents she'd released painted a damning picture. Victor Langston's web of corruption, the sinister network of treatment centers, the children who had vanished without a trace. It wasn't just an expose, it was a reckoning. Her empire would crumble under the weight of her decision. Investors would flee, lawsuits would pile up, and her name would be dragged through the mud. But for the first time in years, she felt something other than fear or ambition. She felt purpose. As she stepped away from the microphone, Harrison approached her, his expression unreadable. "You've burned every bridge you had," he said quietly. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Evelyn nodded, though the truth was more complicated. She didn't know what came next, and maybe that was okay. For so long, she'd lived to preserve her power, her legacy. Now, she was learning to let go. That evening, Evelyn returned to the penthouse, expecting to find Daniel waiting for her. Instead, the space felt eerily empty, as if the boy who had haunted its halls for weeks had never been there at all. Panic surged through her as she searched each room, calling his name. "Daniel?" she cried, her voice echoing off the cold walls. And then she saw him, standing by the window, gazing out at the city lights. His small frame was silhouetted against the glass, fragile, yet strangely luminous. He turned to face her, his hollow eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "You did it," he said softly. "You saved them." "No," she replied, shaking her head. "I couldn't have done it without you, without everything you showed me." He tilted his head, studying her as if memorizing her features. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he added, "It wasn't your tomorrow. It was mine." Evelyn froze, her breath catching in her throat. "What do you mean?" "You died once," he murmured, taking a step closer. "But I brought you back." The words hit her like a tidal wave, shattering the fragile understanding she'd pieced together over the past weeks. Dizziness swept over her as memories, not hers, but someone else's, flooded her mind. A hospital corridor, a white door, a crying child behind it. And then, nothing. "I don't understand," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Who are you?" He smiled faintly, a bittersweet curve of his lips. "I'm the reason you're still here. The reason you came back when Grace needed you. When I needed you." Before she could respond, he reached out and touched her hand one last time. The contact sent a jolt through her system, sharp and electric. Images flashed before her eyes. A fire consuming a building. Masked figures dragging screaming children into darkness. A boy lying motionless on the forest floor, his heart stopping and restarting as if defying death itself. And then silence. When she opened her eyes, he was gone. The police arrived within hours, summoned by Harrison after Evelyn explained what had happened, or rather, what little she could explain. They scoured the penthouse, dusting for fingerprints, combing through every corner. But there was no trace of Daniel, no prints, no evidence he'd ever existed. The DNA results confirmed the truth. No child matching Daniel Harper's genetic profile existed in any national database. Legally, officially, he was a ghost. Days later, Evelyn found herself standing before Grace's grave, the autumn wind tugging at her coat. In her hands, she held a photograph she'd carefully restored, the faded image of herself, Grace, and the toddler who might have been Daniel. Placing it gently on the headstone, she knelt down, her fingers brushing the engraved letters of her sister's name. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking, "for everything." Behind her, the crunch of leaves signaled movement. She turned, half expecting to see Liam, or Daniel, or whoever he truly was. Instead, a barefoot child stood at the edge of the cemetery, his pale face illuminated briefly by the setting sun. His hollow eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, before he turned and disappeared into the mist-shrouded streets of Portland. Evelyn remained frozen, her heart pounding wildly. Was it real, or another fragment of the mystery that had consumed her life? She didn't know. Maybe she never would. But as she rose to leave, one thought lingered in her mind. Tomorrow would come. And this time, she would face it, not with fear, but with hope. But as she rose to leave, one thought lingered in her mind. Tomorrow would come. And this time, she would face it, not with fear, but with hope.